Hello and welcome to the channel. Thanks for joining me today. So today we're going to do a full teardown, cleaning, and reassembly of the Grex Tritium Airbrush. So I've got laid out here the two styles of that airbrush. They're virtually identical except for where the bottle attaches to the actual airbrush or the paint cup. So I have two here because this one is mine with the side-loaded paint cup, and a friend of mine has the same airbrush, but he's having trouble with his. And I told him, hey, I know how to break these things down and clean them real well. Why don't you give me yours, and I'll take it apart, clean it up, and give it right back to you. So his is the top-mounted cup, and that's the only difference between these two airbrushes. So with the top mount or the side mounted one here, it basically takes the cup out of the field of view when you're shooting, which is one of the reasons why I got this. Also, you can flip the cup on the left or right side, so if you're left or right handed and you want to move the cup, or for whatever reason, you can move that cup. So that's the only reason why I got this one, is because of the versatility of the cup. It's not a big deal, but it is a nice little addition. So this one is just the single cup or the center cup. Pretty traditional to an airbrush setup, and the cups can be removed, and then you can put bigger or smaller cups on them as well. So basic tools that you will need. Now, if you've never taken apart your airbrush, your Grex Tritium, you may need a pair of pliers, and so you don't mar the finish. You may want to have like a rag or something nearby so that you can grip the parts, put the rag over your part and then grip it that way so you don't mar the nice chrome finish on the airbrush. Because a lot of times when these come from the factory, everything's kind of wrenched down pretty tight and you can't take it apart by hand. You're going to need some basic tools. So that's why I recommend just a pair of pliers for this first time if you've never taken your airbrush apart to this level. After that, when you reassemble it everything just hand tight, so the next time you have to break it down and take it apart, you don't necessarily need the tools unless it's really gummed up with paint or something like that. So you'll need a basic plier, set of pliers. You'll need a flathead screwdriver, just a standard size, doesn't need to be anything too big or too small. Now you'll need two jeweler size screwdrivers. You'll need a Phillips head and a flathead in the jeweler size, or a really small pointed size. And then you're also going to need the small wrench that came with your airbrush, which is to remove the needle at the front of the airbrush. Now, one small difference that your airbrush may or may not have is that and same with mine, is that we have the fan tip option that you can add to the airbrush. So if you don't have this, your airbrush will probably look something like this one. So, there's the little magnetic needle protector there. So yours will probably look something like that. So either way, it doesn't matter. The breakdown is basically the same for the airbrush. The only difference being the fan spray or the standard spray tip on the end of the airbrush here. So let's get to it. We can start with that tip. So you saw to remove the fan spray, I just unscrewed the entire assembly. If you do have the fan spray, you can break that down further into its three components. So you've got the cap, you've got the actual spray, and then you've got the larger cap that goes on the airbrush. So you've got those three parts that you can break down and clean. Usually the only part that gets dirty is the actual spray itself. The other two parts don't tend to get dirty or paint or anything on them. The nice thing with this airbrush is that because it's all metal, except for just a handful of seals, you can clean pretty much the whole airbrush, including the plastic, with harsher chemicals. Like if you want to use degreaser or lacquer thinner or paint thinner, it's not going to ruin any of the parts since it's all pretty much a metal assembly. And because you're exposing the rubber seals, or you can remove the rubber seals for a short period of time to cleaning solutions, it usually isn't going to degrade those seals either. The inner seal is a Teflon seal, and that is pretty much bulletproof except for crushing when you're installing or removing it. So that's the only big difference there. So again, getting back to the taking it apart, we're going to take, this is a magnetic little cap, so that comes out pretty easy. Unscrew the front end here. I'm going to go ahead and move to the back. Now here you may have to hold, there we go, because there's actually two parts here. There's your needle cap or needle cover, and then you've got the actual needle lock, and then you've got the spring collar. So you take that out slowly because it is spring loaded. You don't have to shoot it out. You've got your spring, you've got your collar right there, and then of course you've got your needle. And then using that small little wrench, just place that onto the tip, loosen it up. Usually doesn't take much more than a quarter turn. Now this is something you want to be careful with because you don't want to mess up the threads. If you mess up the threads in that part of the airbrush here, your airbrush is basically done, and you'd have to replace the body of the airbrush. All right, so to get rid of the grip here, there we go. Undo the nut on the bottom. And you don't have to do it in this order. You can really do it in just about any order that's comfortable for you. I'm just kind of going through this as from memory. It's not really a specific order that is recommended by the manufacturer or anything like that. It's just how it's working out for me. So here we go. We take out the air feed here. Now the air feed, you have to be careful because there's a little sleeve that may or may not come with it. Looks like it's stuck in there. I'll have to get it out later. So I'll show you that sleeve here in a little bit, but sometimes that sleeve is on this end. It's a little metal sleeve that's I think brass, and it'll either be inside the gun or it'll be on this little post here that is the plunger. So that's something you want to be careful for. All right, now for the trigger, you'll just undo with your flathead. That's a flathead screw. So you'll take your jeweler's flathead, undo that screw. There's the trigger. The cup, of course, comes out of the top, or if you've got the side cup, you'll be removing the cup off the side, and then there's a cover for the other side. You would just remove that as well, so that's not too difficult. Now, here's where it gets a little, you got to be careful because there's a lot of little parts that are about to come out of the airbrush, so you just want to work on a surface that is nothing's going to roll away, and you'll be able to find the parts easily. So first thing you want to do is undo the small set screw on the bottom of the airbrush. Be careful not to lose that. That will essentially unlock the brass collar inside here, and then you just take my regular flathead, and you want to use one that's a little bit larger than your jeweler's, and you just slowly take that collar out of there. Now there's a small spring inside there as well, so you want to be careful that you don't lose the spring when you get this out. That's why I'm holding it up this way, so that way the spring stays in there as this collar comes out. So there we go, the collar is out. Tip it over, and there's that spring I was talking about. Now the trigger plunge should come out. Now the last part is the Teflon seal, which that is optional if you want to take it out or not. And I'm going to take it out of his because his is so gummed up and needs to be fully assembled, and for the video's sake you want to be able to take this entire gun apart. So you just unscrew that. You saw I just fed my flathead into there and then turned it out. Now his, we've got a replacement seal. Normally there will be a white Teflon seal right here, but his is, he either removed it or got damaged, or for whatever reason it's not there. So we're going to replace, put a new seal in there. But that's where that seal goes. And later I will talk about how to put that seal or screw this piece back in with the seal so that you don't damage the seal and it actually seals, so that you don't have any leakage or air leakage or paint leakage going through the airbrush. Ah, there we go. So there's that little sleeve I was talking about. The last thing, which you can use one of your screwdrivers, is the actual plunger that's inside the airbrush. So it's in here, and there's a hole at the top here, so you can feed something skinny, push that out, and out comes this plunger. And this was the sleeve that I was talking about that would go, whoops, I think I have it backwards, that would go on this piece here. So the idea is that these two end up like that, so that when you pull the trigger back, the trigger will actually push this down and let air into the airbrush. So that's the whole idea of that. All right, so we're going to go to the next step here. Now, what you could do is you could just take, Q-tips and airbrush brushes, those little cylindrical shaped brushes, and just go through everything, fine point cleaning with your cleaning solution. But I'm going to be using a sonic cleaner. So what I've got here is my very inexpensive Chinese made GT Sonic Cleaner. I got this off of eBay. I think it was somewhere under 30 bucks. And that's all you need. This one is 600 milliliters, so it's basically looks like a rice cooker essentially. Mine has a little separate power base, and there's the on and off switch right there, and then you just set that on there and put all your parts in. So I'm going to move the camera up so you can get a little better view. There we go. Okay. So what I've done is I went and bought, like from the dollar store or wherever, I bought little tea strainers. And so I've got this one here, I've got this little fun one here, and another one that's similar where it just kind of opens up like a little monster. So this is where I put all my little tiny parts, airbrush parts in, so that I'm not trying to fish them out of this big bowl when it's all done cleaning. You don't need these, but it just makes it handy. You can just put all your little parts in there, submerge it into the cleaning solution, and it keeps everything in place. That way you can pull all the little parts out just by taking out the entire strainer. So what I'm going to do here is I'm not going to clean this part. I'm just going to clean this by hand. I'm not going to actually submerge it and put it in here. And same thing with the trigger. I'm just going to clean this one by hand too, because I'm not sure. I'm going to be using lacquer thinner as my cleaning solution for his airbrush, because I don't know what paints he's used, and I know the lacquer thinner will completely clean all the paints. So I just want to keep everything metal that's in here. So I don't know how the lacquer would react to this little rubber piece or the plastic piece. So again, because these aren't really that dirty or anything like that, I'm just going to clean those by hand. And the trigger here, the metal trigger, is not that dirty either, so I'm just going to clean that one by hand. But all the other parts I am going to put in here, because everything else is metal. So here's my little tea strainer. I'm going to start loading in some of the smaller parts in there. And when I took apart the brush, of course, there was just the parts on the airbrush, but I'm also going to be putting some extra parts that he has, some extra tips, extra needles, some of his other bits and pieces that he's bought in for this airbrush. I'm also going to put all of those in here as well. Okay, so I've got the big parts are already in here. I've got my tea strainer full of all the little parts there. So there we go. So everything is loaded in and ready to go. I just need to pour in my cleaning solution. Again, I'm using paint lacquer thinner. All right, so there we go. I put in, now you want to make sure everything is submerged. So I got my lacquer thinner in there, and I've got enough in there so that all the parts are completely submerged, as well as all the parts that are in the tea strainer here. So if you run it with parts slightly out of the liquid, then that part of that section of the part is not going to get cleaned because it's not going through the sonic process. So there we go. I don't know if you can hear that buzzing, and you can see it's starting to bubble. And that's the whole point of the sonic cleaner, is that it is to essentially vibrate the liquid all throughout the parts. And I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but I can see here that the liquid is starting to get a little cloudy. And that's from little bits of paint that are starting to break loose and cloud up the cleaner here. I even can see little flakes of paint starting to float in the cleaner. So it is definitely getting rid of that little bit of paint that's caught throughout the airbrush parts. So I'm going to let this run for the 5 minutes. Sometimes I go through 2 cycles if I think it needs it. And then I will take everything out, dry it out, or let it air dry, and then we'll put it back together. Okay, so it has got, I actually ran it through 2 5-minute cycles just to be sure. And I don't know if the camera is showing it, but I can definitely see that the when I poured the cleaning solution in fresh, it was crystal clear, and now it's got a slight haze to it and slightly cloudy. So it has definitely done its job and cleaned the parts. Okay, so I put down a rag here, a little shake off there, let it drain off as much of the fluid as it can. And there we go. So there's all the little parts. And I'm going to fish out the larger parts with my tweezers here. Make sure you got strong tweezers for these heavier parts. since you're going to have to be twisting and turning them to try to drain them out. Okay, so I'm going to just do a quick little drawing off the major parts here. Won't bore you with that too much. Now, the cup, I wanted to see if it came cleaner than when I put it in. And might not be able to tell on the camera, but it got almost all the paint out of there. There was little dried flakes of paint everywhere, and it looks like I got pretty much all of it out of there. So I'm not going to clean it any further than that, just because, you know, it'll go through cleaning cycles as it get used. But for just running through the sonic cleaner and not doing much else, it did a pretty good job of getting that all cleaned out. So I'm going to, off camera here, I'm just going to take my time and dry everything off, and then we'll get it all ready to be put back together. Okay, so I'm going to start by putting the packing seal in first into the body, because that's something I don't want to forget, and again have to take it all apart. So I'm going to just kind of work it in, line it up. Now, what I've been told from Grex when I emailed them to ask them how to put this in is they said that what you want to do is you want to turn it until there's some resistance, or essentially until it is pressing up against the metal. So you can see here it's turning very free, and then I get to a point where I can feel resistance, and they said just give it a slight turn after that. So maybe a quarter turn is what you're looking for. The idea is that because it's Teflon, it's a soft material, but it's pretty resistant to chemicals. So what you want it to do is you want it to press up against the metal that's inside here, but you don't want to torque it down so much that you start crushing and deforming the packing seal. You want to get it just to the point where it is essentially pressing up against that metal, and then giving it just that slight turn, just to kind of press it a little bit into the metal to create a seal. But if you were to keep turning, eventually you're going to destroy that seal and deform it to the point where it's no good. So this is usually that is all it takes to get it to seal. But if you put it all back together and you run some paint through it, or water or whatever to do a test, and it's, you know, spitting out the back, then that's where the problem is. You might need to unfortunately take it all apart again and just give it a slight turn and put it back together again. So that's the only pain about this, is that if that seal isn't set right, you have to disassemble the entire gun, get to this point, tighten it, put it all back together again, and test it. But once it's set, then usually you don't have to mess with it after that until the seal is completely degraded or breaking down or whatever, to the point where you need a new one. Okay, so once we have the Teflon seal put in place, one thing you will find, especially with the new Teflon seal, is that when you pass the needle through it, sometimes it's going to give you a little bit of resistance. Sometimes it'll feel like you're going to bend the needle or something like that. So you have to carefully but precisely persuade that needle to go through. And I'll show you what I'm talking about here when I put this one together. I will sometimes use a little bit of petroleum jelly. I'll smear some on the needle itself and then help that lubricate the seal as it's going through. To help that glide through. And then you can always run a little bit of paint thinner through it, through the airbrush, once you get it all put together, if you want to clear out that petroleum jelly before you start running your paint through it. So there is a little bit of a particular order when you're putting it back together, just this first few stages, because you have to put in the internal parts here and this little set screw and everything in before you can put the handle on it. Otherwise you're just going to cover that up and have to take it all apart again. So so once you get the Teflon screw set in there, then the next part you want to do is the plunger, I guess is what you'd call it. Oh no, I'm sorry. Back up. First, you want to put in this little guy, and this is the plunger that goes inside here, so that when this gets pressed in, it actually opens up the air valve and lets air through the airbrush. So you can just either drop that in, or you can take your collar and your air nozzle here, connect it. Oh, I got it backwards. Put Put that there, and that guy right there. Now I've smeared a little bit of petroleum jelly on this part as well, because you do want a little bit of lubrication on this part so that it doesn't get stuck open or closed or whatever, especially in this initial assembly, so that it will easily move open and close and especially not be open and just have an air leak. So there we go. Now we can guide that guy in, and I'll just go ahead and set that in, but I'm going to take this back out. Hopefully he stays in there. Yep, good. And that way when I slide this through, it's not going to have a pressure. Oh, got a little bit. So let's take our screwdriver and just push him down a little bit. There we go. Clear the passage. And there we go. That guy slides right in. All right. So now we can put him back in. Okay. So there we go. Now I can feel the resistance of that plunger inside there as I press this back. I can feel that opening and closing the valve, and actually closing, especially that's the important part, so that it doesn't let air out when I'm not pulling the trigger. All right, so we take our bigger spring, drop him in there. Now you'll see there are 4 holes on this collar screw. And those holes, as you turn it and get to this point, you're going to line up one of the screws with this, so that when you put the set screw in there, it actually threads through this guy and holds it in place. So make sure you put it in with the notches facing out, so that way you can turn it with a screwdriver as it gets in there. Again, a good idea is to always start these things. These are all machine threads, so you don't want to cross thread them. So you want to start it by hand, and then once you get it going. Now I am watching for those 4 holes, and there we go, it's starting to come through, and then I'm going to just slow down my turns and find the one that looks to line up the best. And I think that one looks good right there. So there we go. So you're going to take your little tiny set screw here, little jeweler's Phillips head. Now it is a little bit of a tight fit in there, so there we go. It's a little bit of a tight fit, so I hold the screw in place with my finger, guiding it with the screwdriver, and then I make sure that I'm not cross-threading it as I feed it through. Now you have to make sure that this screw sets all the way in flat. It shouldn't be tiny bit of protrusion, but it basically should be flat, because it actually has to protrude slightly past this brass collar, because this guy has a notch that follows right over that screw. So that way it doesn't rotate. So see, it's set in place there. So there we go. We put in the needle guide, the needle screw, and then the back collar. Put tension on that. There we go. And now things can kind of go whichever order you want. Like I go ahead and put the handle on, put the set nut on there. Again, everything is just hand tight, so I don't have to use tools to take it apart again. And then we'll put our, so when you put the trigger on, make sure your notches are facing up. Line him up. Take the screw. One side is threaded and the other one is not, so make sure you feed it in first to the unthreaded side. And then again, slowly make sure it threads and doesn't miss thread. And just hand tighten. There we go. All right, so here's what I was talking about with the needle, especially with the new Teflon tip. So go ahead and feed that needle through. Now right there is, I can feel it hitting the Teflon seal, and I got to give it a little bit of a push to get it to go through. So now it's through. I'm going to back it a little bit, and you can do this in a different order. You could put the nozzle in first, and then put in the needle. But I didn't want to do that because I knew I was going to have to kind of push it in first. So I didn't want to have to bang it up against the nozzle. So that's why I did it in this order first. Now, when you put the nozzle in, make sure that you hand thread it in and get it started that way. Because if you misthread that, and you screw up those threads in there, you've got to buy an entire new body, which is a bulk of the airbrush. And then when I tighten it down, I just give it a little snug turn. Nothing too tight. Now I can press that needle into the nozzle, and there we go. It might be a little hard to see in the camera, but it's up protruding past the nozzle there. So put the needle lock on, give it a nice firm turn, and now you can see here the needle is moving when I pull the trigger back. So now we know that we're going to get air pressure, and when I pull this back, the paint is going to feed through as the needle opens and come out of the airbrush through the air pressure. So should be good to go. So put the cover on the back now. The cover does have a lock stop on it. So you want to make sure that the trigger goes all the way back, and then you can always just turn the lock stop right up to the point where it is completely open. And then as you use the airbrush, if you want to control how much pressure you have, you can actually use that lock stop. And then we put on our collar, and then you can put on either tip. So this one is a full enclosed needle protector. You can store it on the back, and you can put on the one that is half open. So there we go. And now we've got our paint cup, and we have a fully assembled, ready to use Grex Tritium Airbrush. Feels great. It's basically as clean as new with the new Teflon seal. It's almost as good as new, and it's ready to go. I did actually assemble this off camera, tested it, and made sure that it worked both with the regular nozzle and then with the fan spray. The fan spray, if you do have that, I'll show you how that goes together. So you take off the cap here, and then this guy, there's internal threads on the inside, so he screws into there, and then you put your actual fan piece right on there. Make sure the needle passes through. So that is a complete tear down, cleaning, and reassembly of the Tritium pistol grip airbrush gun. Hopefully that'll help you out when it comes time to cleaning your Tritium. Keep watching for new videos, and subscribe and like the video. Thank you.